Welcome to the Unmuted Podcast. My name is Jeff. I'm your host. I'm also the founder of ScaleHR, SocialHRCamp, and we talk about all things HR, talent, HR tech, world of work, AI, goes on and on and on. So we have guests from all over the world that join us, and they're all HR talent leaders and so forth. And so just to remind you all that our episodes live on our website at GoScaleHR.com. We have a brand new website that's going to be launching hopefully soon, and also on YouTube as well. So you can check out our episodes there as well. And then you can hit the bell button so that you get notified when new episodes are dropped. And so it kind of helps you cut through all of the clutter. So we have a really special episode here. I know that I always say that, oh, this is so special, but this is actually a three-episode series with the Schulich Venture Academy. And so we will share all of the information below. But before we bring in our guests, I just wanted to just mention that there's 3 episodes here. Okay. And we will be talking about leadership. And so obviously leadership is a hot topic right now. It's been hot for, several years. So the first episode is really going to focus on the problem or the landscape. Okay. So why leadership in tech? So we're going to focus on the tech industry because that's where I play. And so why leadership can't stay the same. We're going to dive into some of the forces that are reshaping leadership across startups and ScaleUps. That's the first episode. The second episode, which we're going to drop, we're going to do it every week on Thursday. The second episode is really going to focus on the model. So maybe some of the new model for leadership and the modern scale-up leaders. And it's really about thriving scale-up. And so we're going to go from the problem, setting the context, to coming up and talking about the new model for leadership. And then our third episode is really going to focus on transformation in practice. So what does scale-up leadership done differently actually looks like in action? Okay, so those are the 3 episodes, and once again, this is a 3-part series with Schulich Venture Academy, and they were obviously a sponsor of our inaugural HR and Tech crawl during Toronto Tech Week just a few months ago. And so that is what we're doing. So let's get right into the first episode. And so the first episode, we called it, so I always have these sort of funky names, but why leadership in tech can't stay the same. So we're going to talk about the forces, that are reshaping leadership across startups and scale-ups. And so I just want to set the context here, before we bring in our guest, who is Cherry Rose Tan, who is a published author, by the way. I have a book back here, so we will talk about that in just a minute. But so the first point, that I want to make is that over the past decade, tech has transformed at a lightning speed, obviously. And so we have AI, workforces all over the world, rapid product cycles, and shifting employee expectations have obviously changed the game for how companies grow and compete. And I think you would, agree with me that I think COVID, which was a horrible time, kind of accelerated all of these things. But here's the challenge. While the business environment has changed, it's evolved, many leadership approaches haven't. They haven't kept up, or they haven't changed with the times. And so whether you're a founder, HR leader, functional leader in marketing, sales, business, finance, what have you, the old playbook is no longer enough. And so that's what we're going to be tackling. And I think, that sort of sets the tone. And so it's my absolute pleasure to welcome our guest, Cherry Rose Tan. So Cherry Rose, I just want to welcome you to the Unmuted Podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jeff. I was excited that we're doing this 3-part series. And I think this topic, especially for this first episode, is very, very timely right now.
Yeah, it is. Remember when we were planning for this, right? And then all of a sudden the topic got a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I wrote back to you guys and I said, I think we got to split this baby up. This is getting a little bit too much for 20 minutes. So, but it's good that we finally got here. And so let's really dive into it. So can you maybe give us a bit of an overview of your work?
Yeah, 100%. Good to be on the podcast. For those listening, my name is Cherry Rose Tan. And the way I would describe my role in what I do. I very much live and breathe startup, VC, entrepreneurship. And a big part of it is I've been a serial entrepreneur and essentially founder for the last 20 years. Jeff, I see the book there. Thanks for the plug. How that really informs so much of what I do inside our startup and VC ecosystem is that at Schulich, I have essentially two roles. So one role is that I have a title that's known as Entrepreneur in Residence, which is just a way of saying that what I do inside the school is we have about 300 companies, 250 to 300 companies, all built by Schulich alumni. And when I say Schulich alumni, because the school has been around for a long time, it's everybody from like a Gen Z alumni entrepreneur who is maybe early on in their journey, all the way to people who've graduated from the school like 20, 25 years ago. So we have about 250 to 300 companies that we're supporting. So I lead advisory, mentorship, and also fundraising services. So let's say anytime a company wants to scale, they want to do go to market, or they want to raise money from investors, I'm helping them out with that. And then this part, which is especially a big focus, I think, of the episodes, what we're exploring with leadership and tech. I also hold a role and I'm very involved with Schulich Venture Academy, where I was one of the co-creators. And essentially, that piece of what we do at Schulich Venture Academy is that we are building the scale up layer across Canada. And there's a really powerful story to that in terms of like lived experience, things that were told to us by a lot of the companies we were supporting over the last almost decade of things that founders wish that they could see, wish that they could find in their scale up journey that they were not able to get. And a lot, especially for people tuning in, if you're in startup or scale up or in VC, I think you know that building a company is already very hard. But especially when you go into scale up, the stakes are even higher. And so how do we like avoid those mistakes and essentially use education as a way to be able to share those scale up knowledge? So that's the Schulich Venture Academy part of what I do.
I think it's fantastic because, I mean, I've been in HR, I've been part of, leadership for over 25 years, and there's probably 10.5 million, different models, out there. And that if you Google it or, go to AI, most leaders, end up going down, like a rabbit hole, right? And trying to figure things out. And what they end up coming up with may not really work for their organizations. So I really like how you're honing in on a really, core niche that I think is really important. Okay. So let's get into it. So, from your point of view, what are the biggest forces reshaping leadership in tech today, and why can't the old models keep up?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I also love that it's a juicy question because I think some of the stuff I might say, maybe not everyone's going to agree with it, but these are things that I've been seeing in the ecosystem. So I think number one, when we talk about big forces shaping leadership in tech, and I'm just thinking like, Jeff, you and I met for the first time at Toronto Tech Week. I think one of the big themes that came up that week, just being very frank, is this idea of like localization. So I think what I mean by this is right now, especially for those tuning in, I am filming from Toronto, Canada. And I think in Toronto, when we think about at least the Canadian ecosystem, this city has prided itself on, hey, we do have scale ups here. Hey, we do have VC firms here. We've been investing many, many years into trying to build more mature companies. But I think very frankly, we saw this in Toronto Tech Week, just acknowledging for, I would say the past few decades, I don't want to say we've had a dependency, but a lot of our funding that Canadian scale-ups have used in order to scale, let's say Series B, which is you're looking more at maybe like $20 million for a raise, or Series C or Series D. I'm just being very frank. A lot of that has required US investors, for example, in the past. Yep. And I think there's a lot of conversation just because of the global climate that we're in of like, how can we as a country now build the leadership capacity and the resources to be able to scale up our companies without requiring outside support. So I think that was a big theme that I saw in Toronto Tech Week. And I know it's been something that's been talked about a lot. Can we support Canadian companies? Can we have investors really like double down? If we're really going to make this positioning. That's one piece that came up for me there in terms of forces. And another thing I would say that I've seen a lot is, when I think about the previous decade of scale startups and also VC, the previous decade that we just exited out of, there used to be such an emphasis that with the scale ups, the startups that are competing, one of the biggest pieces is that we need to really grab all of the technical talent very early on. There was a lot of focus on, okay, who has the best engineering teams, who can get the product out the fastest, but very focused on engineering talent. And I would say right now, in this past year, especially 2 years, AI has sort of like flipped the game on this, right? So before it used to be, like we need to hire all these people. And now we have things like AI dev tools that are coming in and that are leveling the playing field. So I feel like what's coming up now in these conversations, especially behind closed doors, especially what I'm seeing with a lot of VCs, is it's not just about the technical talent anymore because AI is coming in and leveling the playing ground. Now it's a lot about, hey, if we're investing in folks, if we're looking at people who have moat, defensibility in terms of your scale up, it's going to be dependent on specialists. So people who have domain expertise, people who have, I'm thinking we were talking a little bit about HR earlier, people who have leaders where the leaders are not just generalists, but maybe you're somebody who's bringing 20 years of HR and that's going to be part of your defensibility. So I think we're shifting really an emphasis from, especially from generalists now to specialists in terms of role and in terms of also domain expertise.
So this is really interesting. Do you see Canada, getting better at this? I mean, obviously you talked a bit about, earlier on that, most scale up, Canadian scale up, have to go into the US. Do you see that changing at all in the next maybe 5 to 10 years? Or do you think that we're still going to struggle with that problem?
Yeah, I would say it's starting to shift, but I think it's going to take a number of years before we get to that level of independence that I think we as a country are looking for. But here are some of the micro shifts that I think I'm starting to see. One of the things that I'm more of an optimist rather than a pessimist when it comes to our ecosystem. But one of the cool things I've seen is that because we're having this conversation as a country, we're seeing the emergence of, for example, people in the ecosystem who were previously founders. These, maybe back in the day, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, they were a startup founder. They went on to have a scale up that has successful exit. And I think because people know that the scale up layer is where we're having the gap, at least I'm noticing is that there are now folks, especially those Canadians who are coming back into the ecosystem and being very upfront, like, hey, I'm coming back into the ecosystem and I want to invest in companies. I want to be a strategic angel to a bunch of companies. Or, hey, I'm coming back and I'm actually starting a whole new community so that we can talk about this particular area. And I'll give a really great example, which I know was an exciting announcement from just a few weeks ago. There's a founder that we have in the ecosystem in this country. His name is Raymond Luck. And he ran for many years a company, right? Hockey Stick. I know you're nodding, right? Hockey Stick. He's been very active in the ecosystem as a founder. But now recently he's announced like, hey, I'm coming in as a community leader and I'm starting a whole new event, which I know he's got a lot of sponsors for, to really gather people to talk about what we can do in terms of as a country, as Canadians in terms of these pieces.
Well, that's really cool, actually. I mean, that's a good story. Obviously, my angle is always around HR tech, work tech,
100%.
hiring tech, and then sort of, the leadership. And I think my former lifetime, I was an HR leader for tech companies. And obviously, one of the biggest things was, how do you move a startup to a scale up? But really from a leadership skills point of view. So where do founders and functional leaders typically hit the biggest roadblocks when they're moving from a startup to a scale up?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing is, how to describe it? It's like you don't know what you don't know. So What I mean by this is, when these founders and these functional leaders, when they're starting to go up into the different stages, if they've gotten to a certain level of success, a lot of those folks are probably going out there and they're trying to be ambitious. They're going out and they're trying to figure out, okay, what kinds of advisors do I need for my board of advisors, so that I'm trying to mitigate some of that risk or try to prevent some of those mistakes. But especially for folks who are going up the scale up journey for the first time, or you've done it before, but you've done it in a completely different vertical. I'm just gonna be frank. Yeah, there are things that you don't know. And so if you don't have somebody in your network already who has gone through that entire journey and the dynamics of, when you're Series B, these are the things that you should look for when you're somebody running people and culture and HR, then it's like oftentimes they're experiencing in real time for the first time. And then that's where the risk opens. And I think to give a really good example of this, because I know, especially Jeff, with your background in HR, and I know a lot of the folks tuning in are coming from that background. When we built Schulich Venture Academy, which is all about really helping people get that scale up knowledge in a way that's chronological, like, hey, here's a framework to look at this. Here are the toolkits. Here are the resources built by somebody who actually has been through the early startup journey all the way to scale up and eventually exit. The first person that we ever recruited, and she knows this because I praise her all the time in the ecosystem, but the first person that we ever recruited for Schulich Venture Academy was, Jenny DeForno. And, she's somebody in the ecosystem. And I know we're excited about this, but Jenny DeForno is amazing. Yeah, so we're talking about you, Jenny. And the reason why we recruited her first was that what we saw was, hey, Jenny, she used to be head of talent at Omers, heading up talent strategy and advising 80 portfolio companies that are all growth stage. And we felt like it was very important, if we're going to build a scale up layer, the first person that we should recruit is somebody who is managing talent, who's managing HR. And that's like a really big deal, especially in the scale up world. Like, they are the ones sourcing the talent for all of the functions across the company. So that's what I'm just finding is that, it's important for us to access that knowledge as early as we can, and also for that knowledge to be very specific, right? So it's not just only the stage, it's not just the stage, it's not just the vertical, but we're also hoping that the knowledge you're accessing is also based on your role.
I think this is excellent, because this is something, that I've been advocating for years. Ultimately, my background was mostly in the startup, so I didn't really have any scale experience, and quite frankly, I didn't really want it. But having said that, there aren't very many HR leaders that have true scale-up experience going from a startup. And so I remember I had a conversation with a founder, president of this tech company in Toronto. I'm not going to name them, but they asked me, this was a couple of years ago, they asked me, do you know anyone who was an HR leader, CHRO in Canada, that has taken a company from 250 employees to over 5,000? I said, yeah, maybe 5 people, and that's it, right? So it was a rarity. And so they ended up hiring someone out of the state, which was an error, because they found out pretty quickly that it's hard taking someone that is US based in an HR, leadership role, knows nothing about how things work in Canada. But anyway, having said that, so that's a really interesting thing, and I really, really sort of want to dive into it. But I want to ask you a question as to how do these pressures that plague, functional leaders, founders and so on, show up differently across leadership roles? So obviously you've got, HR, product, marketing, software development, finance, and on and on. So how do you see it showing up differently?
Yeah. And Jeff, what I love about this question is that it's so specific, because I think when we do stuff like scale up, we have to be so careful about the knowledge that we're applying and how we're showing up in the role. So I'll give you some concrete examples. I think from a general, from maybe a pattern, and I'm going to break down the pattern, different functional roles or departments. I would say the general learning that we've seen, and maybe this is coming from my experience working with those 250, 300 companies at Schulich Startups, and a lot of them have gone on to raise a lot of money from VCs, is that to just acknowledge and to know that depending on the department that you're in, right? So for example, we were talking about HR. For example, if you're coming from finance, if you're coming from, let's say, operations, that every single function in that company in a scale up actually has a different set of pressures, and also the kinds of variables that show up, the kinds of situations that allow you to kind of flag, hey, we're about to head into a crisis. They also look different for each of those departments. I'll give an example. One of the big ones that we saw when I'm thinking about supporting my portfolio companies at Schulich, this is in the HR function. We got this asked for so many years before Schulich Venture Academy happened, was we would have companies, they would go and they would raise a seed round, or they would go raise a Series A. Very talented folks. Maybe, for example, hey, you had, 10 plus years in real estate. You're running a prop tech company. You got pretty far based on being driven, hustling, etc. Then you raise, let's say, a Series A. And then all of a sudden your VCs are telling you, hey, you've got to double your headcount in 12 months. And you got to hire all these roles that you've never hired before. And then on top of that, you're going to have to try to figure out how you're going to systematize all these HR processes. And you probably haven't had it really systematized because you've been sort of mixing and matching things, putting a lot of Band-Aid solutions. And now you've got to professionalize everything that you're doing. So for example, like in the world of HR and people and culture, we've noticed that ask quite a bit. Like, hey, the pressure to have to go into hypergrowth, to have to hire that rapidly every time you have a fundraising round, that is a lot mentally. And then there's also these, I'm going to say fears, but these concerns that you have to navigate. Oh, when you get into scale up and you need this specific person who has that many years of experience, very frankly, a lot of your competitors are competing after the same pieces of talent, same folks, the same talent. So then how do you make sure you build, let's say, a brand or a company that actually is attracting the best talent? So for example, that's some of the stuff that we've seen in the world of people and culture and talent. And then if I give a different example in the world of finance, related discussion, but different pressures. So in the world of finance, some of the stuff that we're seeing with that function, which is a really critical one, is sometimes you get folks in that startup that now becomes a scale up where initially those folks, they come from a CFA background, CPA background, very talented in running accounting. But the thing is, we also need them to be able to think as operators. So for example, if you think about a CEO who's up there, who has to make high stakes decisions all the time, you have to figure out when you're going to start fundraising, etc. This accounting person, it's not just about putting out the numbers. We have to find a way to translate those numbers and be able to communicate them across different functions. Like ops needs some of those numbers. Hey, that person who's running at the C-suite level, C-suite needs those numbers, but they need it in a way that they can understand so they can make strategic decisions in real time. So these two flavors that I'm giving you, Jeff, I know these are just two of many different functions that we can talk about. There's like sales, for example, and business development. That's a whole different other function. But what I'm trying to describe for folks who are listening is that every single function inside a scale up, if we have the right resources, the right mentorship, etc., these are things that we're able to actually navigate because these are patterns that are known in each of these scale ups and each of these functions.
I'm going to throw something at you. So this is something, that I've noticed, right? Obviously over my career. So startups, say like under 50 employees, 75 employees are really good at wearing multiple hats. They're really good at going across, departments, like if they have any, and working with other people quickly. The problem when you get to a scale up and you start hiring specialists and an expert, they start to create their own silos. So you have HR over here, you've got finance here, you've got operations here, on and on and on. If those silos, continue, that is what kills companies, because because you obviously want to build your own subculture, right? So obviously, I as the HR leader want to create culture for my team. The problem is that you all have to be striving towards the same strategy. So whenever you get into business planning, which was obviously very foreign, for a lot of first-time founders or companies going, through growth and scale-up mode, but they viewed that as old school. I'm like, no, because you need to have something up here that like, like each of your sort of functional leaders is actually striving toward. And then they take it and they make it their own, right? But you have to be
Mm.
talking to each other, because if I don't know what's going on in finance and finance has no clue what I'm doing here, then there's going to be constantly conflict, going on, and you'll start to spend money or not spend money or make choices that actually don't make sense. Does that resonate with you?
Percent. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting you mentioned that, Jeff, that you've been seeing that in when it comes to like the scale ups and startups and folks that you support, because we've seen the same thing where it's an interesting dynamic, right? Because on one hand, it's like when you're going and you're a scale up, like you do need that specialty, but at the same time, if folks don't talk to
Sure.
each other, then one of the biggest fears that I see there is then how do you make, once again, those strategic decisions, those high stakes decisions with all of the information that's needed when people are siloed? So, one of the things that we've been seeing, when I think about a different function now, which is ops, but ops, I feel like connects very closely with people and culture and HR,
Yeah.
is that I feel like this is where ops needs to come in. And for example, when it comes to this particular piece, how do we make sure that, for example, ops can come in and support each of those, let's say, department leaders by bringing them together to have regular systems of communication where people are sharing, hey, this is the key types of updates that are happening. These are our priorities that are upcoming, so that connection still stays there. And so I think that's a piece where hopefully that connective tissue really comes in. But I agree with you, Jeff, 100%. Like there's this dynamic where, yes, we want to have specialty, but we need to also make sure that folks talk to each other. And I think that's why too, like the work that you're doing, Jeff, is so important, because I would imagine with the amount of companies that you've worked with, the amount of leaders that you've supported, all of that knowledge that you've had, all the different scenarios, and you're now able to do like that pattern recognition and able to help clients and other folks be able to see, hey, this thing that you're encountering, I've actually seen this before, and like this is how we can navigate it differently.
Switching gears over to Schulich Venture Academy. So obviously you started there as a major, project. So what was the gap that you saw in the ecosystem that really inspired the, creation of?
Yeah, honestly, Jeff, it really came from a lot of like lived experience, not just me, but more like the ecosystem, like what people were telling us, different founders of different stages and even different verticals, what they were experiencing. So I'll give you an example of this. When I was working with these 250 to 300 companies at Schulich, some of the big problems that we saw would occur after somebody fundraised. And the biggest one that people saw was that, they would say things like, hey, Cherry Rose, we just got this funding. That's great and all. But now we have all these expectations that we have to meet with VCs. Now we're going into hyper growth. And the fact is, a lot of our founders, they found that they didn't have access to the knowledge or the advisors or the mentors that they needed to get to the next level, right? So they know that there's a gap. There's something that they want to fill. And, for folks here who are listening, who maybe you're not coming from startup or VC, just to paint you a picture, how it's been traditionally in our ecosystem is, when you go up these stages, so for example, pre-seed, seed, series A onward, when we have these labels, the way that people used to get this scale up knowledge is a little bit of luck and sort of like trial by fire. So it's like, hey, I raise money from wherever I can. And it just happened that I got like a top tier VC, and this VC has been in the ecosystem for 25 years. And maybe that VC, the general partners there, two of the three general partners, they happen to be ex-founders who've exited. So they have an existing network. And now I'm brought into this ecosystem of very gated introductions and networks that took them decades to build. And so I just happened to be one of the lucky few that got invested by this VC or had a very strategic advisor that got me into those rooms. And now I have access to certain folks that I need to get to the next stage. So there's a portion of those people where, that's their strategic advantage. And I'm just gonna be frank. And then there's all these other folks where maybe they didn't have that top tier VC. They were still able to raise some funding, or maybe they were able to get to scale up by, really hustling and getting to a certain revenue target. And so for all of those other folks, they're kind of left in There's all these rooms that I'm not able to access, or I actually don't even know who are the folks I should be asking to get those kind of introductions and mentorship. And so that was the inspiration behind Schulich Venture Academy. If we're talking about a world, I'm thinking about the question you asked me at the beginning, Jeff, like the forces that are at play in startup and tech. And leadership in tech. The first one that I mentioned was this idea of localization. I think a lot of countries right now, I'm thinking about a global scale, not just Canada, a lot of other countries, they're thinking about how can we compete at a global level without being dependent on other countries for their talent, for their VC funding, etc. And so that was the concept behind Schulich Venture Academy. We know that there are Canadian veteran leaders out there who've gone on to sell a company. We know there are people out there that are very talented VCs who have perspective because they've invested in this many companies. And so what we did is we basically asked each of these veteran leaders across very specific functions. So we're talking about like venture talent, for example, which is Jenny DeForno, who's running that, the individual I mentioned earlier, very, very talented in the HR space. Hey, Jenny, can you come in because you've worked with so many growth stage companies? Can you come in and build a certificate program with us for the next generation of HR leaders who want to do what you do, but they need it in a sequence that's manageable, that has toolkits and maybe a capstone that is very very hands-on, so they can bring this knowledge back in a way that's actually usable. And we did that across different functions. So we had like talent, we had one for venture ops for the operational leaders, like, hey, there's a COO out there that we recruited who actually went all the way from like year one of the company all the way to exiting a company and now is in this post-acquisition phase. What was it like for her to go up those ranks and to be able to do that? And then same thing with finance, venture capital, and venture sales. So that's what we found is just, if we're trying to be more independent, can we take that person's knowledge and package it in a way that can now be made accessible to people who are ready to do that education?
I think it's fantastic, and I'm a huge fan of it. So we will share all of the proper links for people to be able to access everything. So just to sort of recap, just to ask one more question. Viewers can learn just one thing about anything that you talked about, that we've talked about in this episode. What would that one thing be?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, what's coming up for me, this is the theme of a lot of the comments and things that I've said before, is that, Jeff, I was sharing it at the beginning of our podcast. I'm very much an optimist. I know that there are people who are listening to this podcast right now people have had really strong feelings about what's happening right now in our ecosystem, what's happening right now for us as a country. And I would say the number one thing is really for all of us here who are listening to really not do this alone. To know right now that as an ecosystem, people are really rallying. They're rallying in terms of, I talked about this earlier, founders who exited some time ago coming back and saying, hey, now we're creating VC firms. Hey, we're coming back as strategic angels. You have a whole layer of other folks, for example, people like myself and people at Schulich Venture Academy who are coming in. We're rallying a different set of folks in the ecosystem. Hey, come and build courses with us so that founders can access this. But I think that's the most important thing is, if you're somebody out there who is navigating the world of startups and scale-ups, go be in the ecosystem, go talk to folks and know that things like events, things like mentorship, things like courses, they're here for you, right? In order to really empower you and to open up your network.
Well, I can talk about this stuff forever, but I just want to thank you very much for being here at Cherry Rose. And so we are going to do one more episode with you. So once again, everybody, this is the Unmuted Podcast. This is part one of a 3-episode series with Schulich Venture Academy. And so we will be sharing all of the proper links with everybody to access their amazing programming. So Cherry Rose, thank you very much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.